I'm Shahir, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Really excited to be back today with another client interview for you guys. Today we have Bobby on with us, and really excited to have Bobby with us today because he just finished going through the summer 2025 recruiting process. Um, Obviously, I'll let him tell you more about it, but it was a very grueling process, as it always is, and he was able to come out the other side with a very, very good offer. And so wanted to get him to come on here and just kind of talk about his experience with you guys and also share some insights along the way that will hopefully help you with your own process as well. And so, Bobby, first of all, thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. And if you don't mind, um, start things off by just kind of introducing yourself briefly and kind of giving our audience a sense of who you are.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sam. So really nice to meet everyone. I know it says Econ on that's my legal name, but I go by Bobby. And growing up, I was kind of this policy nerd. In the beginning, I wanted to go into public policy actually. So never really this banker type. People have told me I'm type A, but I've never had the idea of like going to private sector, wanting to do like finance. I was always wanted to actually in the beginning wanted to become a policy analyst at the World Bank. So that was my dream in the beginning. And then it kind of came to an end after I realized, and I worked on a few international development projects where I realized that the core policy, in my opinion, is a lot less about, I guess, the public sector has a lot more to do with the private sector and
Yeah.
about kind of private economies. Having worked with banks globally. So I decided to make that transition my first year. So I go to Johns Hopkins. I'm a current sophomore in international studies and economics. So you can see kind of the policy connection there, but I decided to make that transition sometime about honestly like 6, 7 months ago. So pretty early. And that's when I decided like about 1 or 2 months in, I decided I needed help. I was a little lost in process. So that's when I decided to turn to Wall Street Mastermind. But let's learn more about myself and my journey so far.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome, man. I'm sure we'll dive more into kind of some of the things you just talked about. But before we do that, people always want to know what was the outcome of your recruiting process? Where'd you end up getting an offer from? Can you kind of tell people where you're going to be going?
Yeah, sure. So I decided to accept an offer at Bank of America. Some people call it BAML, but Bank of America, their investment banking group for some analyst program in New York.
Awesome. And
So yeah.
what did it feel like when you got the offer?
Oh my gosh, I screamed. It was great. I know I've heard of stories of people crying. I heard people like it's I think it's surreal in the beginning, because I think people don't understand how hard it is to get an offer in the beginning until they go through the process. It's a lot of hard work, no doubt. But with enough hard work, the offer comes. All my friends so far, a lot of them have gotten offers, at least part of the program who are in. So with enough hard work, I think that the offer comes. But definitely, it was a surreal experience. It was pretty insane. So I'm glad I got it.
And also, I agree. I mean, hard work is definitely non-negotiable, right? But as you're putting in the hard work and you're going through the process and you don't have the offer yet, it doesn't feel that way. Like it doesn't feel like
Yeah, it
it's a
feels like
certainty that the offer will come eventually. In fact, there's probably many moments along the way where you're like, oh, I'm never going to get this offer, right?
right. So, like honestly, yeah. I mean, I recruited for 4 months. So I've like throughout that process, I've like there were people getting who are part of like diversity groups, going like in the diversity programs, in the like insight programs, who are getting offers, 2 months, 3 months before me, and going through that process, I was like, oh my gosh, there's like I'm just not good enough. I'm super late. I just made the transition. Like some of my friends here at Hopkins, actually, we're a very small group of people who want to go into investment banking, but they like one or two of them had gotten offers in the restructuring group, so that they recruit first, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's over for me, and that was how I felt for 4 months straight. So it worked out in that. Honestly, it worked out really well, but I think it during the process for sure, like you don't feel like your hard work is paying off. It feels like you're one like it's reflected by a lot of people who are also in the program who are like my close friends now, but they like it feels like they're throwing in hard work and it's just they're not getting what they want from that hard work. But I think ultimately like within a like once you get the skills polished and you're going through interviews, it's just a matter of numbers. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think during it can feel like you're just banging your head against the wall for no reason, right? But I always tell everyone this. I think a lot of people that go through investment banking recruiting, obviously, you're type A, you're a high achiever, you've done well in school your whole life, you
Mm,
got to the college you wanted to get into, you've pretty much like always accomplished every goal you
mhm.
set out to accomplish for the most part, up until this point where this is for a lot of people the very first time when they are having to like deal with a lot of rejection and like
Yeah.
consecutively in a row, right? In a very short
Oh
amount
yeah.
of time. And so that can be like very jarring for, people with this profile and they don't know how to kind of deal with that, right?
Right.
And so, but the reality is like having coached over 1,300 students at this point, like the vast majority of the students do not pass every single interview they get. Like the vast majority of the students do not get every single offer that they interview for. Most of the students, because of how selective investment banking is, like most of the students have to get rejected several times first before they get their first offer, right? And so, like as coaches, we don't really freak out when students, don't get their first few offers or whatever, because we're like, oh yeah, we've seen this movie before. But for the student that's going through it, they're like, oh my God, like I'm getting rejected multiple times, like something wrong with me or whatever, right? And I think part of that is just like, yeah, in the beginning, the first few times you interview, you're not going to be as good. And sometimes, like, even after failing a few interviews, you learn from that and you get better at it and you put in the reps. And now every subsequent interview, you get slightly better and slightly better and slightly better. And then sometimes, too, also, like, you didn't even do anything wrong and you actually did well. But it's just there are so many candidates and there are only so few spots that there is some element of luck involved as well, right? And so sometimes it's not really your fault. And so anyway, that's great though. Obviously it worked out. And I think screaming is a normal reaction. So, but if we go back to all the way to the beginning, were you because you say, I guess you decided on investment banking like 6, 7 months ago, and then 1 or 2 months in, it was kind of when you decided to go with Wall Street Mastermind, right? And
Yeah,
so
that's correct.
you joined around like the end of November, I think. So for like those first, and that's to be clear, end of November of sophomore year, which is basically like right before all the applications were about to open. So like all the applications
Oh yeah.
open like right after you join, right?
Right. JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, yeah, all of them open
Yeah.
November. So
For those first couple of months prior to joining Wall Street Mastermind, like what were you kind of doing on your own in terms of recruiting prep or networking, or I don't know what you had done prior to coming in, but like what were some of the things you were doing and what were the resources that you were using to do that?
yeah, sure. So my school has an investment club. I'm not in it now, but essentially I was networking a lot with the school investment club. They call it investment club, but everyone there is doing investment banking or asset management, wealth management into like finance, right? So I network with them and I talk to them a lot about how best to recruit. The go-to methods they recommended at the time was the 400 question guide, which by all means, it's good. Like the 400 question guide's good. And there's also like the Wall Street like prep some of their stuff as well. But I realized like unless I'm in the club getting the entire Hawkins network, because our network's not great. It's not like that large, but it's there for sure. Like if for a few banks it's pretty big, but most of the banks there's almost no network. So that's when I decided I need to find some support for this process,
Yeah.
especially since my knowledge at the time, like there were students at Hopkins who want to go into investment banking day one. So they started recruiting all the way back. They did like an insight program, there's a Morgan Stanley sophomore program that some people already did. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm way behind, right? So I decided, okay, I need some help. So that's when I decided to reach out. I actually went to a few different programs and private like contractors in the beginning, but I feel like they weren't structured enough. So that's when I walked. It was actually really random. One night, it was one night's decision. One night, I was going through the internet, came across one ad on YouTube on Wall Street Mastermind. That's how random it was. And then I was like, okay, I'll reach out, and reached out, hopped on a call, and then I was like, okay, this seems pretty legit. I'm gonna go and take a look, and then join the program. And I don't know, the rest is history, I guess. But yeah, that was kind of the whole process in the beginning. Not much. I didn't actually know much. Like if you asked me I always say this, but if you asked me 5, 6 months ago what EBITDA was, what margins were, like what like a EBITDA margin was, what the multiples were, if you ask me what a DCF or LBO is, I have no idea. Like I wouldn't have been able to tell you. So
Yeah.
I think the growth I've had is crazy.
Yeah. You said 5 or 6 months ago, basically you knew nothing from like a technical standpoint, basically.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I knew nothing. Yeah, that's right.
yeah, no, and that's pretty normal. Like a lot of people come into our program, maybe they just decide they want to do banking, but they haven't actually studied or learned any of the technicals yet. And so that's pretty normal. You mentioned you found us through an ad on YouTube. I guess I'm curious, like what, because you mentioned it sounds like you also worked with a couple. You said private contractors. I assume that's like tutors or something, right?
There's like some like they call themselves like you know how on LinkedIn there's a few that like sell themselves as like career tutors or career like consultants.
Yeah.
That's what I worked with in the beginning, but I they were just weren't like what their expertise were actually recruiting for consulting, and I was like I was not in the right place in the beginning, so that's
Hmm.
what happened in the yeah early on.
Got it. So they're more former consultants, not bankers. But um, what specifically made you want to go with Wall Street Mastermind as opposed to, because I feel like there's so many of these resources or coaching programs, or at least I'm seeing more and more of them now. Like we've been doing it for 6 years and we're probably one of the OGs in the space, but I'm definitely seeing it becoming more and more popular now. Um, and so like why go with us as opposed to, I don't know, the plethora of options that you could have out there?
Oh, I would say that's a good question. I think the reason why I chose Wall Street Mastermind was actually because it's a protection program. Like where it's like if you don't get an offer. I remember we talked about this a lot. Like before I signed the contract, I was like, can you guarantee me into a Bulge bracket or Elite Boutique? You know, how's like the refund program work? And I think mostly it's just like the safety of a contract.
Hmm.
Like not all the programs have contracts or like of such detail. I
Yeah,
looked over the contract. I was pretty happy with it.
yeah,
And so that's when I decided. Like there's like the guarantee program where it's like if you don't get an offer, like or if you can't get into banking,
yeah.
you know, like the program will like refund you, etc. Like that. I think that made me feel safe. I would say that's like total honesty, yeah.
No, that makes sense. And that's why we started offering that. Obviously, we can't offer that to like every single Joe Schmo on the street or whatever, right? But like
Exactly, yeah.
people with reasonable qualifications, I think um like at this point, having coached over 1,300 students, like we have a pretty good feel for who we can get jobs for, who we can't get jobs for. Doesn't mean you go to Harvard or Wharton and have a 4.0 GPA and already have like a super stacked resume where you're a total shoe in, right? Like you said, you go to, I was a JSU is probably semi-target school at best, probably borderline non-target for a lot of firms. And also you are coming in without any technical knowledge. So it wasn't like, you were a lock, but we felt confident with the amount of time that we had left to help you, and also based on our conversation with you, that you had a good head on your shoulder, you were committed to getting this job, we felt like you were the type of person who's actually gonna come in and do the work. That's the other thing. Like sometimes we talk to students and they're like very wishy-washy about how much they actually want this job, and we're like, I don't think they realize how hard it's going to be. I think they just heard that investment banking pays a lot, and so it sounds great. But once they actually
Yeah.
come in, they're probably not going to do any of the work, which means they're not going to get a job. In which case, like we can't guarantee anything. Like even our guarantee, it's the guarantee is that as long as you do the work we ask you to do, you will get a job.
Right, exactly.
It's not like hey, as long as you pay for our program, then you will get a job. Like you're not like we're not like bribing the banks to hire you or something, right? No, and I say it's funny because I think some people sometimes have the wrong idea. Like, oh well, if I just like now that I pay for Wall Street Match, but like, this job is just going to be handed to me on a silver platter. I'm like, yeah, if only it
Yeah.
was that easy, or like, if it was that easy, then I would be charging you a heck of a lot more because,
Oh yeah.
um, but no, that makes sense. So you like the guarantee that we offered. Essentially, it's almost like you're investing in yourself, but the downside is protected because you're going to do the work, and the upside is very significant. Obviously, if you get in,
Right.
that's kind of how you thought about it, right? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, was it difficult? I assume like you had to talk to your parents about the decision to join this program and get their approval and buy-in. And was that like a difficult conversation, or were they like pretty supportive from the get-go, or did you have to like really convince them? Like, how was that?
I think I was lucky. My parents were I've been a good kid growing up. That's what I like to think, at least. You know, typical Asian household, immigrant family, moved to the U.S. Now 11 years ago, so a long time. But I've kind of proven to my parents I did a lot of education consulting, back in California. That's where I grew up. So we had a touch, give or take, to consulting firms.
Mm.
But that's like I talked to my parents. So I decided pretty on a whim. Same with my parents. They trusted me more or less. So I was very lucky with the support they gave me.
Mm.
But I would say it was over 2 days that I decided. So very fast turnaround. But yeah, I just something spoke to me, so I decided to take it on. It worked
Yeah.
out okay though. It worked out pretty well. So
What did they say when you got the offer?
my parents have no idea what investment banking is. So they're like, "Oh yeah, good for you, Bobby. I'm glad. Don't work yourself too hard." Because my mom used to work in the industry, so we do import export industrials.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of like international like wholesale work. So my parents have always been the idea of like, oh, you can work in the office, it's fine, like it's not the end of the world, you'll be fine. Just don't work yourself too hard. Like
Yeah.
I think my parents never really understood what the investment banking does. And granted, I did not know until like, and I don't think I knew properly until like maybe 3 months ago that what investment banker did like on every side, like ECM, right? There's ECM, DCM, left fin, all that stuff. So all that stuff I had to learn as well. So I don't think my parents know, but they're pretty happy for me. They're like, oh yeah, good job. So
Um, yeah, that's very normal. I think most parents don't know what investment bankers actually do, or the ones that have heard the term think it's like managing money for rich people or something, which,
right.
or like picking stocks, which it's not really what that is, right? Um, and so I think like sometimes, I guess you got lucky, but sometimes that conversation can be difficult because you're trying to convince
Oh
your
yes.
parents to support you with a program that's going to help you get a job that they don't understand. And naturally, they also don't know how hard it is to get that job. Naturally, they also don't know all the benefits of getting that job, such as the high pay, the prestige, the exit opportunities. They're like, what's exit opportunity? Like,
Right, yeah.
and so like, I think for some people, that conversation ends up being very challenging. But I think you bring up a good point, which is like, depending on how you were growing up and what kind of relationship you have with them, if they trust your judgment or not, makes a big difference on how easy it would be for you to convince them to invest in you even more than they already have, right? So,
Mhm.
but that's great to hear. So you came in, right, and it's like end of November, sophomore year, like I said. Um, what walk us through like kind of like what were some of the things that you've been working on over the last, I guess at this point it's been 4.5 months, right? Almost four and a
Oh
half.
yeah.
You probably got it about 4 months in. So like for the last 4 months, from the time you joined until you got the offer, like what have you been doing? Um, what did you find to be the, I guess, biggest needle movers for you, or like what were the most helpful or most impactful things that you kind of did in this program?
Right. So I think the most important thing I did was go through all the technicals and behaviorals modules. Actually, those are crammed in real early. So I actually because the applications were set in November. I joined late November, I'm pretty sure, if I remember this correctly, and probably started around late November after my finals
Yep.
last semester. Because I was loading on credits, but that was when JPM and Morgan Stanley already were sent out. So you had to get your hire review in, and at the time I have no idea what depreciation amortization was. Like on my hire review, I straight up just like searched up what's DNA like before the hire review. I was like, oh, I bet they're gonna ask me this question. What is DNA? And then like they actually did, which is so funny. But I searched up how to answer an accounting question, right? And that was definitely like a new experience for me. And I realized how it's frogging a well. It's the best term for that. But decided to go through all the behavioral and technical modules within the first month. Really helpful. I actually think that was probably one of the best decisions I made to start off technicals early and behaviorals early. I think if you can blast them through in 1 month, give or take, you're gonna like I was in a pretty good spot after that. I think what really woke me up to this whole process was I had an interview with Guggenheim RX, which asked me accounting questions in the first in like early January. This was so you like no technical knowledge. Went in there and they just asked me like it was terrible. The interview went really good on behaviorals. Like I think we got along, and then he just started asking me all the other questions. I was like, I have no idea. So, uh, so definitely getting technicals down, getting the behaviorals like more or less like refined, and then I think that's really what took me very far.
Gotcha. Okay. So you basically you have to go through like a really horrible interview in the beginning where you completely got destroyed on the technical side, and that was like the wake up call, and you're like, okay, I gotta learn my technicals, basically.
Yeah, because I was like moving through them slowly in the beginning, but that's
Yeah.
yeah, and I sped up after.
Yeah. And you said you were able to finish prepping all of your behaviorals and all of your technicals within the span of a month.
Yes, it was a lot of sleepless nights. It was fun. I think I like learning new stuff.
Yeah.
Curious person, but like
Yeah.
it was a lot, definitely. So I'm glad I got it done.
Yeah. I mean, I think like obviously to learn so much material in such a short amount of time, you're gonna have to put in the hours. But to be honest, I think just to put that into context for people, to be able to learn everything you need for investment banking interviews in a month is like that's probably as fast as it's going to be. Like that's as efficient as it could possibly get, right? Because a lot of people spend months and months and months memorizing the 400 questions guide and they're still not ready for their interviews, right?
Mhm.
And that's kind of the difference. And to your point, once you fail that first interview, you kind of had a lot more sense of urgency after that, right?
Right.
And having a sense of urgency is so important in the recruiting process because I think a lot of people don't truly understand how quickly recruiting moves, and then they lack that sense of urgency and they don't learn things quickly enough. And if you didn't like learn everything in just that one short month, you probably got other interviews after that that you would have also wasted those opportunities. And at the end of the day, like you're only going to get so many opportunities, right? In terms of interviews, like they're not every single interviewing opportunity is precious. Like it's not easy to come by. I know I said earlier, it's like most people have to you also have to like almost budget for at least a few rejections before you get your
Right.
first offer, right? And so it's like you just want to minimize the number of rejections you have to get before you get your first offer, right? And so that's why like the biggest thing for us, the students that we work for, is like, and something that we've put a lot of thought into when we're designing kind of our curriculum and training and whatever is like, how quickly can we get people up to speed on all the things they need to
Mhm.
know? Like, how do we get people from where they are now to complete mastery in the most direct and straight line method possible so that it's like the least amount of time possible, right? Because the sooner we can get you the offer, the better the offer is going to be typically. Like the longer recruiting has been going on for, the more top firms are going to be taken off the board and they're going to fill
Yeah.
their and you have to move further and further downstream to lower and lower tiered firms. Right. So I think at the end of the day, it's all about speed. Because like other people's like, oh, like everything you need to learn is already on Google. Like you can learn all the technicals yourself just by watching like free YouTube videos and whatever. It's like, yeah, technically you could do that. Technically you could, but like it's gonna take you a lot longer. And then that means you're either gonna get a worse offer because there's fewer good options left, or you're gonna get no offer because you just didn't make it in time at all. Right. And even getting a worse offer, um, you might think you got in for free, but it actually costs you more in the long run.
Oh yeah. It
Yeah,
it
because
it
like,
would, yeah.
yeah, there's survey data out there. Like if you look at even just how much money people make throughout the first 7 years of their career in investment banking, um, by year 7, you're a first year vice president, right?
Right.
3 years as an analyst, 3 years as an associate, first year vice president is your 7th year. So I think like within the first 7 years of your career, if you're like elite boutiques pay the highest, right? But they're also the hardest to get into, and they also finish recruiting the earliest. If you
Yeah.
are working at an elite boutique for 7 years, I think you'll end up with, I think it's like $2.6 million on average over your first 7 years, right? Because
Mhm.
by year 7 as a VP1, you're making about 650K, right?
Yep.
And you're starting at around probably like, 175 or whatever, and it just goes up. So $2.6 million over your first 7 years versus if you end up at a bulge bracket or middle market bank, first 7 years is like 2.1 or 2.2, still really, really good, but that's like a $500,000 difference.
Mhm.
And if you go down to like even further to like the regional boutique level, then first 7 years, you're talking like maybe $1.6 million, which is still a lot more than almost most other jobs out there. But that's $1 million difference versus if you were in an elite boutique. So it's like, did it cost you anything? Yeah, it cost you anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million. because you took a lot longer, right? And I think that's the thing that people aren't really thinking about when they're like, oh, like whatever, I can just learn everything for free. It's like, yes, like given enough time, you can learn anything you want for free. But unfortunately, investment banking is not one of those things where the recruiting timeline has no time constraints and you can take as long as you want. Like it's actually the complete opposite, where you have very little time, or the recruiting timeline pulls up earlier and earlier every single year, right?
Yeah, you're right. I think just I wanted to add on a little bit also with regards to kind of recruiting into different banks. For me, I considered MBA quite a bit. I wanted a good experience going to MBA, especially work experience. So I think some MBAs look a lot at prestige, right? And you're especially with investment banking, there's prestige given in bulge bracket, like some bulge brackets, and some boutiques. And I think not only is the pay different, like for example, like some of the higher bulge bracket boutiques are paying right now plus bonus like 180, 190, up to 200,000 a year. If you're looking at like a normal like boutique, maybe their bonus is very little. Work culture is terrible. Like for some, I've from what I've heard for some boutiques where they're working you a lot, like 90, 100 hours a week with like maybe 90 to 100K a year. So big difference. Oh, maybe like plus 10, 20K bonus. So I think that's really one of the big differences. But also like the lack of prestige could lead you, or lack of deal flow or experience could lead you to a point where you might not be able to get a good opportunity later on for like MBA, or maybe you from boutique bank, maybe you can't lateral like recruit into a better bank later on. So I think it really limits you to where you want to go later. So
Yeah.
that's yeah.
Yeah. Basically, long story short, if you really count and look at the lifetime value over your career, being able to make the slope of your career trajectory steeper is worth a lot, right?
Right.
Because you have a
Yes.
very long career that's probably minimum 20, if not 30 or 40 years. Like most people work probably for over 40 years, right? 20 if you're really lucky, right? But like, and you just somehow, make a ton of money, retire early or whatever, but like it's several decades basically, right? And so being able to increase your earning power for every single year for the next several decades, it's like, how much is that worth, right? So, um, I guess the interview piece obviously made a huge difference, both in terms of technicals, behavioral, so on and so forth. Um, how was your uh kind of like resume coming in, and also how was like your networking process? Because like we talked a lot about like the interview prep side of things, but I think also in terms of like the first challenge that a lot of people have before they can even before they can even worry about passing the interviews is getting the interviews. Like a lot of people don't even get interviews in the first place, right?
Oh yeah.
And so, can you talk a little bit about kind of what you did to help you get more interviews? And also, like, I don't know how many, I don't remember how many interviews you ended up having throughout this process before you got your offer, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with how many interviews I got. So I would say give or take probably eight or nine. 8 or 9, 9 or 10. So pretty good considering when I joined, but also pretty good in general. Like I've had friends who did not get us have not gotten like more than one or two interviews, and that just places a block on like where they can go, right? So a few things I think first is like the hard non-negotiables, GPA. I there's really a very strong like correlation between if your GPA is lower than a 3.8 or 3.9 or like 3.7 is negotiable, 3.6 is negotiable, 3.5 below, I like it's hard. It's really hard, like, honesty. So I think, GPA is generally non-negotiable. School target versus non-target. Target schools are generally a little bit more like people are a little bit more lenient towards target schools. On non-targets, you're just gonna have to try a little harder. I think with enough hard work, everything works out. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. But GPA is non-negotiable. Your classes are to some extent non-negotiable. You should take a few. Like they want to have some demonstrated interest, right? Even if you're not taking your classes the semesters before, you can say, I'm going to be taking these classes to pursue this interest, to show them you have demonstrated interest. And then additionally, whether you're, before you join the program or after, before I joined, I had an internship with a boutique firm for investment banking. Much structured like a search fund, but you have to find something internship related. So there, like really a lot of these firms I'm looking at. I've talked to a few HR people. They're just like, we're gonna scan your resume in like 1 or 2 seconds. We're gonna look at GPA, look at the school, look at classes, look at like one or two activities. Are they related? If they are, maybe we'll pass you and give you an interview. If they're not, then we're just gonna reject you. Like if we see a GPA under like 3.6, we're just gonna be like, oh, if they have good activities, maybe if they don't have any activities relevant, we're rejected instantly. So like they're going through a lot of these resumes. There's just not that level of turnaround, like time for them to go through them. So a few things you're scanning, you just have to be like up there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you make a lot of good, those are all definitely very relevant factors in determining how easy or how hard it is for you to get interviews. Um, for sure, target schools have an easier time getting interviews than non-target schools. For sure, the higher your GPA is, the easier time you're gonna have getting an interview. For sure, like the more relevant experience you have on your resume, the easier time you're gonna have getting interviews. The one saving grace, if you don't check all of these boxes, which a lot of people don't, um, is networking, right? Like
Yep. Mhm.
you are GP, if your GPA is on the lower side, like you said earlier, if nobody knows who you are, they're not gonna pick your resume. They have like so many.
Yeah.
I always tell people like the resume screening process. People think it's like a very thoughtful selection process. It's actually not. It's an elimination process. It's not a selection process. Like basically, they have like for every 100 resume they get, they're trying to like eliminate as many of them as possible and trim it down to like 10, right?
Right.
Who will actually get interviews. And so it's like they're looking for any possible reason they could have to eliminate you. So they're like, oh, go to a non-target school, like bye. Like, oh, okay, bye. Oh, no experience, bye. Like, oh, have a typo, bye. Oh, poorly formatted, bye. Like, there's so many
Right.
like you're trying to like eliminate all the reasons they could have to throw your resume into a trash can. Now, if you do have something like that, then really the only way to overcome that is to network, right? Like you basically
Hmm.
need to network so well to the point that there's going to be someone who's already working at the firm who goes in and basically refers you and pounds the table and says, hey, we got to interview this Bobby guy because
Right.
talk to him and he's great. And I think he'd be a great fit. And here's why. Right. Um, and I mean, coming from, JHU, like you said, like it's not like you guys have a ton of alumni on the street, especially if you're not, in one of the feeder clubs. And so how did you like what was your experience with networking? Because going through that, like I feel like for a lot of these firms, um, again, you're probably maybe at best a semi-target school, but a lot of times you're even a non-target, right?
Right.
Like what was that experience kind of like networking as a non-target? Because I think you had a good GPA, right? And you have some relevant experience. So you check those boxes, but you didn't go to like a Wharton or a Columbia or NYU Stern or one of those schools, right? How did you overcome that, I guess?
Yeah. So just sending out emails. The emails are really important. Sometimes honestly, I think people think networking is a numbers game, and that's true. But if you just get on one good call, like one single good call, the analyst, okay, personally, I think most effective is reaching out to MDs and VPs because they have a lot of power and they like you. They like you. They just tell you, hey, tell an analyst to associate, go talk to him, go refer him into the like. Go sometimes you can give you directly to the campus recruiting team, right? They'll be like, oh, here's this guy I talked to. He seemed pretty cool. He like he knows what's going on. Why don't you go and interview him? So it takes only one good talk, like one good conversation sometimes for you to get an interview. For me, that was the case for a lot of regional boutiques. No, I'm sorry, regional offices, excuse me. So for example, Deutsche Bank, for my Deutsche Bank's interview, for my city interview, like both of these are in San Francisco. I had a few others, like Alan Coe and a few others, right? And they just straight up just taught one guy was all it took. And they said, hey, I really like you. I think you're gonna be great for this position. I'm gonna run you through an interview. Good luck. And once you get the interview, they can't help you very much, unfortunately. But before then, one good conversation, you're in. So I think really just sending out cold emails, it's a numbers game at the end of the day, but having good conversations and making sure each one matters, I
Yeah.
think is even more so important.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like, and I think you make a good point, which is a lot of people, I feel like make the mistake of only networking with analysts or associates because they're more junior, they're more accessible, they're more similar to you in age or closer to you in age. So in a way, they're more relatable and easier to talk to, less intimidating, blah, 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 right? But a lot of times they also have less influence, right?
Right.
And so like I always tell everyone, like, not that you shouldn't network with the analysts and associates, but you should diversify your networking efforts across different seniority levels because there's different pros and cons. Like for a senior person, yeah, they're harder to reach. But I guarantee you there's also way less people reaching out to them with networking requests. So you might just catch them at the right time and they might be, feeling good that day and agree to help you out or talk to you or whatever. And yeah, at the senior level, like you said, all it takes is one good conversation and they have a lot more influence at the firm and they can just go and make things happen for you. Right.
Right.
Because 8 or 9 or 10 interviews or however many you got, like that's a lot. I think a lot of people would, give an arm and a leg to get that. Well, like to your point about like, having friends who did not get more than 1 or 2 interviews, going back to what I said earlier, a lot of times if you only have 1 or 2 interviews, your first few interviews probably aren't going to be your best performances. And so like sometimes like it takes you 1 or 2 interviews just to get warmed up. And if that's all you're going to get, then the chances of you getting an offer is a lot lower. Right.
Right.
So um that makes a lot of sense. I guess one final question for you, which is
Hmm.
now that you're on the other side, um, what's like the best piece of advice, or maybe just something you learned along the way? Maybe it's something that someone told you, or something you figured out on your own. Um, that just like really made a difference for you, and something that you can kind of pass down to um, anyone in our audience who's maybe still going through the process now or about to go through the process. Is there anything like that that you wish you had known back when you were first starting out, I guess?
Yeah. I can give like one or two, if that's okay. I would say first, just make the right friends. I think one actually, I didn't have a chance to say this, but I think Wall Street Mastermind, what really, in my opinion, was the most valuable was the modules were very valuable, but really the people. I think, the team that you get access to, like I've made some of my really close friends here. I met in person with some of the coaches. Like we just hung out and it was great. Like I think it was a lot of fun. But that helps that I think mentality and camaraderie helps someone go through the recruitment session because it's lonely. It's recruiting is very lonely. It's difficult and it really takes a lot of time. So I think having people like close friends who you can relate to and who is helping you through the process, whether that be mocks or et cetera, that helps a lot. Where that's what helped for me. And then other than that, I would say just very typical like work hard, reach out to people, and doing interviews, treat it like a conversation. The guy on the other side of the screen, they might not seem like it, or guy or girls, excuse me, but like they might not seem like it, but they're just people. I mean, they had a hard day. They've been working all day. Maybe it's a Monday. They're like, oh my gosh, I hate interviews. And you go in, and you smile at them, you say, hey, how's your day? Really nice to meet you. I mean, I'm glad to be here. This is my number one bank, right? And I think like that cheers them up. And so I think attitude is important, but also the people. Like be exposed to good people and work hard enough, and you'll get there.
Yeah, for sure. I think completely agree with that, and especially that first point that you made, which is like, and people that are already going through it now, they know this, right? It's like recruiting is a very grueling process, but also can be very lonely because, and our students tell us this all the time, which is if you're recruiting at a non-target school, you're like probably one of the only students that's trying to break into banking. There's no one around you who's, trying to do the same things that you are. So you don't have anyone to talk to in the first place. Or maybe like for you guys at JSU, like you said, it's like very, maybe a very small group of people, right? Uh,
Hmm.
and if you go to a target school, everyone around you is trying to get investment banking. So it's
Right,
almost,
exactly.
but at the same time, what our target school students tell us is that if you go to Wharton, for example, everybody holds their cards super close to their chest because they
Mm,
don't want to um like they view you as their competition. And
right.
there's so many jobs to go around. And if you get a job, they feel like that's one less job for them. Right. And so it's still not like this super collaborative environment typically where everyone's helping each other out. For whatever reason, I mean, I can't take credit for this. Like we didn't set out to do this by design, but we just ended up with a very collaborative culture here in Welsh Management where like, students are constantly sharing intel with each other, like, oh, this job just open, that job just open. Like, has anyone heard where this firm is at in their process? Or, you know, sharing like interview questions into like a centralized database where everyone can kind of like go back and look like, oh, I have an interview coming up with this firm. Like, what questions have other students gotten asked from the same firm? Like, doing stuff like that just one makes the process a lot more bearable. I'm not gonna say fun, but like bearable. And I think like when you're going through something tough, it always feels a lot better knowing that you're not doing it alone and you're going through it with other people. It's like for people that have maybe pledged a fraternity or a sorority, it's kind of the same thing, right? It's like you're not pledging by yourself, you're going through it with your entire pledge class, and that like makes you bond because you're going through like something very tough together. And that's how like really strong relationships are formed, right? So yeah, couldn't agree with you more. I didn't know you met up with some of the coaches in person. Who'd you meet up with? Just curious.
With Daniel Stone in SF.
Ah,
We
okay.
had coffee together. We grabbed coffee, grabbed some snacks together. We talked for a good 2 hours, like him and I. He was just like, what's like I was like, what's private equity like? What's like, how is City? Like he 19 I heard like his story is crazy. 19 years old, recruiting. I mean, it's like absolutely insane. So
Yeah,
we talked, it's great.
he's very definitely amazing guy, and just super nice and super helpful too. So that's awesome that you guys met up in SF. Um, cool, man. Well, that was really good advice. So thank you for sharing that. Look, for our audience, for those of you who are still with us, if you're currently going through recruiting or you're about to go through recruiting and you find yourself in a similar situation, maybe you go to a non-target school, or maybe you go to a semi-target school, maybe you don't have like a huge alumni network that you can rely on. Maybe you're not in the investment clubs on campus. And so, you're feeling like you're behind the 8 ball. Like you have people that have been doing this from day one since they stepped foot on campus, and you just, decided recently that you want to recruit. Whatever the case may be, if you want to kind of get a boost with your recruiting efforts, get your own competitive advantage, level the playing field a bit, because it is a very competitive process and it's very difficult. And you want a group and a community that you can become a part of so that you don't have to go through this by yourself. Then I want to encourage you to reach out to our team. You can go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street is abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And what we'll do is we'll get on a call with you, someone on our team. We'll learn more about your situation. We'll understand like what your goals are, where would you like to work, what kind of help do you need, and then together like we'll kind of help you map out what we think makes sense for someone with your situation, because every single person is different. Some people go to target schools, some go to non-target schools, some have good GPAs, some have lower GPAs, some have lots of experience on their resume, some have no experience. Some people are international students, some people are not. Like every person is different. There's no one size fits all solution, but at a minimum, we'll help you map out a game plan that makes sense for your situation. And then from there, you can decide what you want to do with that. Like if you want our help implementing that, great. Happy to work with you if we think it's a good fit. If you want to take it and just run with it on your own, that's totally cool too, right? So that's my little offer for you guys. If you guys go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply, again, the streets abbreviated to ST, then we look forward to talking to you guys. All right. And with that said, Bobby, I want to thank you again for coming on here and spending so much time with us, talking about your experience, sharing your journey with us. I think, your story is going to inspire a lot of other people who are in a similar situation and, maybe worry right now about whether this is something that they can actually do or not successfully. And obviously, I think if you work hard enough and you have the right guidance and the right mentorship and the right preparation along the way, there's no reason why anyone can't get into investment banking, because honestly, if we're being real, like it's not rocket science, right? It's just that a lot of the stuff that you need to do, they don't teach you stuff in school, and you have to figure out another on your own, right? So,
Right.
Anyway, thank you for coming on, and huge congrats again on the amazing offer, and I'm really excited for you, and I think it's well deserved, and I look forward to seeing what you accomplish at Bank of America next summer.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. All right, guys, that's it for this episode. We're gonna wrap it up here. We'll be back with more release for you guys in the near future, and until next time. All right, cheers.